English. But I'll pass over to Ruth to introduce Abi, and thank you so much. It's lovely to see so many people. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm only literally going to say a couple of words because the floor is definitely Abi today, and also to apologise I have to leave at 1:30 because I'm teaching, so don't anyone take it personally. So thank you, Donna, for doing such a storming job, and colleagues for setting up the Academic Woman series. For those of you that don't know, the Academic Woman is a global network of academics at all levels and all interests and varieties. And my own work, which looks particularly at women in leadership and women's careers, I know from that the importance of role models and us being able to see women around us that we can relate to and to have some sort of sense of community. And if we don't have those things, it makes everything just that much harder. So the Academic Women's Network provides a really good service in that regard. And certainly some of the women that have spoken, it's wonderful to see colleagues across the university that you wouldn't otherwise come across and know about their amazing work. So certainly it's been really inspirational. And it's great to be able to celebrate colleagues' work that then allows us all to kind of remove or work towards removing both internally and externally held barriers that we find in our careers, and really help us to be the best that we can be. And somebody that is definitely being the best that she can be is Dr. Abi Dymond, who I'm very pleased to introduce today. Abi is a lecturer in sociology and criminology. She is award-winning. She has the Outstanding Early Career Award and an ESRC Celebrating Impact Prize this year, so she's doing phenomenally well. And her work is fascinating. It's around the police's use of force and the reporting thereof, and I'm sure obviously she will tell us lots more about that. But following her work, at least 30 police forces in the UK have reviewed their policies and practices and taken up 9 out of 10 of her recommendations for standardising reporting requirements, which is pretty impactful. Somebody who's passionate about getting our work out there and actually making a difference in the world, this is somebody who's doing it. The data from Abi's research is now publicly available in annual statistics at the Home Office, and Abi is a member of the College of Policing's Guideline Review Committee, which provides guidance to police officers on how to improve their own safety and the public's safety by resolving potentially violent situations without the use of force. So a fascinating subject. Over to you, Abi.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. I must admit I hadn't actually heard of this network until I was invited to speak at it, so I'm really excited to be here and hopefully to take part in the rest of the events that are happening as well. And what I was asked to speak about was really, just very quickly, some of the issues that I'm working on at the moment, which, as you've heard, tend to be around police use of force and police use of taser, and how to enhance monitoring and accountability in situations where force is used. And then I was asked to speak just kind of briefly about my own kind of personal journey to my current role as well, and how I ended up where I am at the moment. So I'm just going to very quickly talk about my current work and then how I ended up doing it. And then I thought, given that this is kind of a women's network, and as you said, very interesting, not just to hear from other women, but also maybe to hear a little bit about the founding or kind of areas where like additional support could be helpful, could be necessary. I was just going to kind of pull a couple of those points from my own perspective as I'm talking, and then just at the end conclude with a couple of points where I think kind of further support would certainly have been helpful for me as a woman, and hopefully then just turn it over to you guys for discussion and networking, so I'm not going to speak for that long. So as you've heard already then, my research is focusing on police use of taser, and in particular, police use of force. So as we all know, this is a really controversial area. Police use of taser, which is a projectile electric shock weapon that's often called less lethal, is very controversial, not just for the medical impacts that it's claimed to have, but also due to some of the circumstances in which force is used, including recent controversial cases in Bristol and Avon and Somerset a couple of years ago, where an ethnic minority individual was tasered in the face by a police officer with a taser. The police officer in question was subsequently charged and found not guilty, but just one example of a case where force has been used and has hit the headlines and has been very controversial. But it's also not just police use of taser that's an issue. I think quite often people tend to focus on taser because it's kind of quite sexy, it's got a kind of recognition, but actually police forces use a variety of other forms of force, often daily. So things like restraint techniques, pinning people down, things like batons or pepper spray, things that might not hit the headlines in the same way as police use of taser or police use of firearms, but can still have really profound consequences, both for the officers themselves, but also for the people on whom force is being used. So, for me, it's a really interesting issue. It's an area that's kind of critical to get right for a variety of reasons, but it's also an area where I think there are a number of challenges in terms of how we bring about generating improvements in this area. So obviously there are lots of challenges and issues that I could pick out around police use of force and police use of weapons, but I'm just going to focus on a couple. So as we've seen from the slide below, there are often widespread concerns about how police officers use force. So how frequently are they using force, who are they using force on, in what kinds of circumstances are they using force and are they using weapons? And that's not to say that police officers shouldn't have the ability to use force. Indeed, obviously, one of the key parts of the police role is this ability to use force in situations where it might be appropriate and where it might be proportionate. But at the same time, with that power comes enormous responsibility and comes a role not just for the police themselves, but for oversight bodies, and I would also argue for academics to be monitoring that and to look at how they're using that force. So there were kind of broad concerns about how often force is used, the types of force that are used, and the individuals on whom force is used. At the same time, however, in England and Wales historically, we had no standardised reporting system for police officers to use when force was used. So although there was a national system in place that police officers had to fill out whenever they used a firearm or whenever they used a taser, for things like batons, kind of punching someone empty hand techniques, irritant spray, there wasn't any standardised data available at all about when that force was being used, who it was being used on, what the consequences of use were. So what we found in the course of my research surveying police forces on this topic was that actually practice varied a lot between police forces. So some forces would keep very detailed records, other forces wouldn't keep very much at all, other forces would just have paper systems. So that was one real issue when it came to looking at how police forces are using different types of weapons, how they are able to review that and how they are able to bring about improvements. If the data's not there or it's not being collected or analysed, then it's really difficult for them to take the next step and to make sure that they're using force appropriately. So alongside concerns over how force is used, there were issues around transparency, when police officers did use force and the accountability for that. From my perspective, there are also broader concerns too about the lack of guidance that officers are given around when it's appropriate to use force and around when it's appropriate to use taser. So for me, one of the concerns that I see in my research is that the guidance is very weak and very vague, which then in turn makes it a lot harder to hold police officers to account, because if you don't have a really clear standard of what isn't appropriate, then it's much more difficult to then hold them to that standard. Following on from that too, I've been talking a lot about the police, but obviously use of force is a much broader issue, and I think there's also a challenge here when it comes to looking at the role of human rights monitors, torture prevention bodies, people who go into places of detention and monitor situations where force may be used, which is again making sure that they have the capacity to work in this area and to document the types of force that they might see, to document the types of weapons that they might see as well. So, as I see it, those are some of the challenges involved in working in this area of work. And what I've been trying to do, both at the national and international level, is to help play a small part in combating some of those challenges. So, as we've already heard, when I was doing my PhD, I was invited to work on the use of force reporting review that was set up by Theresa May when she was then Home Secretary. So this involved doing a survey of police forces and finding out what the current practice was around recording use of force, and then making recommendations for the review in order to improve that practice. So as a result, we now have a standardised system in England and Wales that means that any police officer or anyone employed within a police force, so police staff as well, whenever they use force, irrespective of what it is, whether it's handcuffs, whether it's empty hand techniques, now have to fill out a standardised form, irrespective of what force they're based on or what type of weapon they use. This includes information like the circumstances of use, what were the injuries relating to use, and who was the force used on. And this is collated, it will be published nationally, and police forces are also required to make this data public on their website on a quarterly basis as well. So the idea here then is both enhancing transparency, but hopefully also enhancing accountability around this area. As you say, it's a really new system, so it's only been introduced for about a year and a half, so we're still working on it at the moment. And one of the things that I'll be looking at going forward with colleagues is looking at the data that's coming out of this kind of first year and kind of looking to analyse that and some of the patterns that are emerging. As we've already talked about, following on from that piece of work, I'm also involved in a project the College of Policing, so the professional body for policing in England and Wales are involved in, which is trying to assist officers in how to handle situations that may have the potential for conflict without using force. So providing guidance both to officers but also to forces in terms of what should they be training their officers on, what are the steps that they should be taking to try and ensure that where possible their team are equipped to have other ways of handling situations without needing force. And this really is due to concerns around some of the issues around training with police use of force. So while police officers have kind of a 3-day mandatory course that they have to take for taser, actually the length of training that they're required to undergo for things like batons and handcuffs can vary massively between forces. For some forces it can be less than a day a year that they're expected to spend on other forms of force. So if it's that little, then the concern is there's not always space within that for them to be taught how not to use force, for them to be taught how to approach people in different ways. If you've only got a day, the risk is you focus on, refreshing how to use handcuffs and how to use batons, and you don't focus on some of those issues, really. I also just wanted to mention, so that's in the course of my paid work, but also in my kind of volunteer capacity, I'm also a member of the Independent Monitoring Board at Exeter Prison as well, so basically going in and monitoring conditions in the prison and looking at complaints from prisoners and from detainees. And I wanted to highlight that because I think, often one of the challenges working in academia, I think everyone does it because we're so passionate about our subject, but then it can be a real challenge then making time to do voluntary work outside of academia, making sure you've got that space to kind of, invest that time in other projects that you might want to do as well. So that's the work that I've been doing nationally, and then internationally I've been working with the UN Subcommittee for the Prevention of Torture, which works worldwide both to monitor and investigate places of detention, but also works with a network of torture prevention bodies globally, so national bodies that also go into places of detention and prisons. Been working with Chairperson Malcolm Evans from Bristol University to produce a guide that's helping them document weapons and restraints as well, so kind of trying to come at it from the other angle, not just looking at police practice, but also looking at how can oversight bodies hold state agents that use force to account. As part of this work, and thanks to the ESRC funding that I received for the ESRC Impact Award, I've also then been training some of these national bodies on issues around the use of force and taser and how to document weapons and restraints as well. So just last week, I went to Poland and was involved in a training there with the OSCE, kind of really helping them kind of implement some of these techniques. And also internationally then, I've also been working on the development of guidelines for the use of lethal weapons internationally. So the idea here is that whilst internationally we have very clear human rights standards on when firearms should be used, And at least in theory, there's very clear norms and standards about when the use of deadly force is appropriate. When it comes to the use of less lethal force, in some ways it's a little more fuzzy, and there's fewer clear standards as to when the use of different types of less lethal weapons is appropriate. So working with the Geneva Academy of Human Rights and Humanitarian International Law, we're working together to try and pull together some standards, both from existing standards on the use of less lethal weapons that hopefully will then also be a guidance document internationally. And the idea here then is also to help complement national standards on the use of things like batons or taser that might not always be as strong as you might like, or in some cases they may not even have guidelines at all, so they may give officers weapons without kind of clear guidance on when or how they should be using them. As has already been mentioned as well, kind of I guess the sum total of this work, but in particular my work on the use of force reporting review, led to me earlier on this year being awarded the ESRC Celebrating Impact Early Career Researchers Prize. And I wanted to mention that here really just because I think it also highlights an interesting point around the role of women in academia. And that was really that although I'd seen that the ESRC were open for applications for this award, I didn't actually think that I would be suitable for it. I didn't think that that my work was kind of good enough to apply for it. Until my colleague in professional services very kindly said to me, "Oh, have you seen this? Like, you should really think about applying," and really kind of like encouraging me to apply. But I guess for me, because it said it was like outstanding, I was like, well, I don't think my work is. I would never describe it as outstanding, and also it felt for me like a lot of the stuff I'm doing is very collaborative. So it's not me. I mean, it is me that's doing it, but it's not just me that's doing it. If you know what I mean, it's very much working with other people. And I think there's maybe something here too in terms of kind of giving women the support and the confidence and the encouragement that maybe we need a bit more to think, actually, I could put myself forward for it, or, you know, even if I don't get it, there's kind of no harm in trying for it, really. And the other point that I also just wanted to make around that as well is I think if you look at the content of the presentation that I've put forward so far, it all sounds very exciting, and it is very exciting, and it all sounds really kind of positive and stuff, but I think particularly in academia, where to some extent we are very much lone researchers, so we are very much kind of solely responsible for the areas that we work on and the findings that we produce. I think whilst it is very exciting, you can also feel quite vulnerable, and I think you can also be very kind of vulnerable, both personally and professionally, to kind of different forms of feedback on your work. So kind of to illustrate that, I just kind of pulled up a few quotes of things that people have said about my work. Like, some of them are kind of really positive and really nice and supportive, and again, lucky enough to have some kind of recognition from the ESRC for the impact work as well. But obviously some of them have been less positive, so I've had my research called A Complete Waste of Public Money by a solicitor. I've had some really kind of harsh reviews that say because my work is looking at police use of force in England and Wales, this is something that has already been studied elsewhere. So it's just a limited incremental contribution to debates, which I just want to mention because I think sometimes it can seem like, wow, everyone's doing all this impressive work and it's really amazing, but actually I think you can get some really mixed messages about how valuable and how important your work is. And I guess one of the challenges of being a female academic is to learn to take that criticism, and how do you respond to that, and how do you respond to that constructively. But I also worry slightly, depending on the feedback that you get and how you receive that feedback, I think that can sometimes be really discouraging, and it can kind of make people feel that maybe academia isn't for them, or maybe they're not cut out for it. And I think, especially when you're a PhD student perhaps as well, you sometimes feel, well, actually, I don't know what I'm doing, you know, I'm not sure if I should really be here, and so then when you have those kind of comments, I think it can be really tricky. And again, I think, unlike previous jobs I've had, where I've worked for NGOs and you're very much putting forward kind of a corporate position or a position that's an organisational position, here, because your findings are so very much your own, I think that when people criticise you and criticise your research, it can feel a lot more personal and can be like a lot more discouraging in a way that maybe if you're just putting forward like an organisational point of view, it's not quite the same, if you know what I mean. I mean, that might just be me, but anyway, just a couple of thoughts about that. So that's kind of just a very quick overview of what I'm doing at the moment, and then I just was asked just to speak speak a little bit about how I ended up doing what I'm doing now. So I actually wasn't a conventional academic, so I spent 10 years working outside of academia, mainly doing policy and research for NGOs, so initially working for an international development NGO looking at a variety of human rights issues, so looking at copper mining in Zambia and the role of corporations and the extractive industries in developing countries, and then looking and doing some work in the eastern DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, looking at sexual violence there for women as well. And I think for me that's been really valuable, and I think all of those skills have kind of really helped me kind of get to where I am today and kind of have the confidence to the extent that I have it now to kind of work on the topics that I'm working on. But I also think it illustrates, it's not like a typical narrative of someone who just did kind of, undergraduate work and then postgrad and then went straight through to do a PhD. I took some time out of academia, well, most of my career has been outside of academia. I actually think that's been quite helpful and quite useful for me then coming back into academia. And then, so that was kind of my previous life, my previous career, and then I started doing the PhD in 2013, and basically just wanted to speak a bit about my experiences there as well. So I was lucky enough to get SWDTC PhD funding at Exeter and Bristol, and then whilst I was still doing the PhD, got appointed to be an associate lecturer here at Exeter, which was a part-time post and was something that I kind of had to manage alongside the demands of the PhD programme. While I was in the final year of doing the PhD, my wonderful supervisor encouraged me to apply for ESRC funding, and that was also something that, again, I don't think I would have thought about or would have really had the confidence to apply if someone had said to me, kind of really given me that push. And also, I guess I didn't realise for me, in my head I was kind of very much focused on finishing the PhD, so I didn't kind of realise that actually, you have to be almost applying for funding for the next project before you've even really finished the first project. So again, I think that's something that might be helpful for others to bear in mind, because sometimes I think you can get so focused on just finishing your current project, it can be really difficult to look ahead. But anyway, I was lucky enough to get the funding from the ESRC, and now have got a full-time position as a lecturer in criminology at Exeter. I think also worth mentioning here, it was kind of second time lucky for me, so I applied for a number of posts and applied for another lectureship position here at Exeter, which I got interviewed for and then didn't get the position, and then luckily had some really helpful feedback from that, and then luckily this position came up, so I interviewed and applied for it again, and then got the post like the second time around. But again, I think kind of just worth highlighting in kind of the context of how do people get to where they are, and sometimes it can look like this really smooth like narrative, but I think it kind of misses out a lot of those kind of missed opportunities, and also the world of chance really as well. Like, it was lucky that the second job came up when it did. And the other thing I also just wanted to mention as well, because I think this might also be a broader issue for some people in the room as well, is kind of issues of working part-time versus full-time. So initially when I took the lectureship post, I actually wanted to do it part-time, because my original idea was to combine kind of the NGO work on the one hand and then kind of the academic work on the other. In my head I thought, well, that would dovetail really nicely and I'll kind of have the best of both worlds. But actually I really struggled and found it really hard being part-time in academia. I think possibly because of the nature of the role, but it's such a kind of all-encompassing role, and it didn't feel like the workload that I had was proportionate